Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Elections Group webinar. Very excited to have two really awesome partner organizations joining us today for a really deep and insightful conversation. My name is TJ. I'm the Director of Partnerships at the Elections Group. For anybody who's joining us for the first time, the Elections Group is a team of election experts supporting election professionals through collaboration, thought leadership, and elevating best practices. We've all worked in election offices, so we know firsthand the challenges faced by election officials, and we use our real-world experience to help election professionals solve those challenges. Today with me, I have Grace Kleinfelter, who's a research analyst at the Bipartisan Policy Center, Tammy Patrick, who is the Chief Programs Officer at the Election Center, and last and probably least, I have Noah Prates, who is the president of the aforementioned Elections Group. I'll give everybody an opportunity now to go ahead and introduce themselves, beginning with Grace.
Hey, thanks, TJ. Great to be on. I'm Grace. I'm with the Bipartisan Policy Center's Elections Project, and we've been working on a collaboration with the Elections Group for a while around workforce initiatives. So Noah and I will be taking you through a recent thing that we put together that we're hoping will be helpful to election officials.
All right, go to Tammy.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to be here virtually to see all of you. My name is Tammy Patrick, and as was mentioned, I'm the Chief Program Officer for Election Center, the National Association of Election Officials, where we now have over 2,000 members. We are the only association that is composed of both election officials at all levels of government, as well as vendors and service providers and nonprofits working in the space. So today, I want to share with you something that we've been working on for a few years prior to coming to Election Center, and that is bringing together state associations and give you kind of a heads up on where that project stands as it now lives at Election Center. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
That's amazing. And then Noah.
Hey, y'all. My name's Noah, co-founder of the Elections Group, retired election official. Big fan of Tammy and Grace and their organizations, and excited to talk with y'all today.
All right. Well, we're going to jump, I think, right in with some presentations at the top before we go to questions. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Tammy, to start us off. And you are muted if you...
There we go. I'm assuming you can now see my screen. And so we're going to start this from the slideshow.
The coffee looked good on screen. It's like a permanent reminder.
So while I'm stumbling around behind the toolbar, I will tell you that that is a coffee served when I was at the Bipartisan Policy Center at Miami-Dade. We were having a large jurisdiction meeting, and at, I don't know what time of the day it was, 3 o'clock, there's this knock at the door, and they brought in these trays of espressos. And I thought, oh my God, this is what every election office needs. They need that Miami infusion of espresso to keep things rolling. And so that is my inspiration is that particular photograph for all the reasons, because it reminds me of that lovely meeting, Bipartisan Policy Center meeting in Florida, and all the great work that so many election offices are doing around the country, which is my segue into my presentation. So what I mentioned before is back in 2018, we had started working on bringing together election offices and our election associations. And I will tell you, it was when I was at the Democracy Fund, and the whole idea came from Stacy Scholl. So Stacy, I worked with her at Democracy Fund. She had been at FAP for years, and she said, you know, these state associations are doing all this great work, but no one's bringing them together. And so in 2018, Pam Anderson and myself and Stacy and others started bringing together state associations. And so for years now, we've been talking about the state association work. And we decided, you know what, we need to call it something. So earlier this year, we codified the Coalition of Election Association Leaders, or CEAL. And it is, as I mentioned, a project of the Election Center at this point. And I mentioned Election Center because although the organization's been around for decades, I've been a member for 20 years, NOAA is in the Hall of Fame. It's important to recognize, yeah, there you go, that we have new officials to the space that maybe aren't familiar with the organization. And really at its core, it is around to promote and support continuous improvement of election administration through a variety of ways. And that's really where this project came out of, because we tend to bring election officials together in educational settings, through training and research, and as well as consulting and conferences and convenings that we have, because networking election officials is important not only for that learning process to share best practices, to share horror stories, things that you'd never want to do. Don't try it that way. You might want to do this instead. But also to make sure that we have an understanding of where the state of play is for the field as a whole, so that we can amplify those voices and those successes in the national narrative, which is now more important than ever. So I mentioned the projects of Election Center. Another project you're probably familiar with is Election Line, where you can get your election administration news every morning, Monday through Friday. But this is a new effort. And the SEAL mission is really to support the professionalization and strategic government of associations across the country, strengthening their maturity, maturation of the associations, as a way of sustaining local election officials, because not everyone can make it to national conferences. Not everyone can even make it to their state conference. So how do we make sure that those associations are still being robust and have capacity? One of the things that we've done, Election Center has devoted our April workshop. We have 4 different events every year, and the April workshop is now designated to this notion of state associations and bringing people together to talk about governance, to talk about how they manage committees, what is their legislative committee doing, how are they managing, suddenly it's your turn to put on a conference, how you go about that. How do you get the nice things, as Pam Anderson likes to say? And a lot of that has to do with things like, how do you afford to have an executive director of your association so that it's not another job, another task for election officials to do in addition to their regular job? So one of the things that we came out with this year, just launched last month actually, is the Association Maturation Guidebook. And it's a self-assessment guide to really give you an idea around what is the state of play around the country. One of the things you'll notice is on our website, we have a version of it, but at that April meeting in Pittsburgh, we workshopped that guide and have a new one that we'll be launching later on this week. It's not on the website yet, but will be very, very shortly. And thanks to the people that you see on the screen with me here for their suggestions and improvements to the guide. So let's walk through the guidebook a little bit. There's a lot of information there. There's an overview and an introduction that kind of talks about the state of play of associations. It's not the case that there's 50. There's not one in every state. Some states have 3, some have 4, some have 5, because of the way election administration is divided up. It gives you some self-assessment tools to take a look at, and I'm going to walk through a couple of those real quickly here in a minute. And then there's resources. One of my favorite parts of it, however, are the case studies. So we looked very specifically at 4 states that do have executive directors of their associations. Everyone from Ohio and Colorado that have had them for a number of years, to more recently Missouri, or Missouri, if anyone from Missouri is on the call. And then most recently, the Texas Association. So those case studies are really interesting. And then we have checklists. Election officials love checklists. So there's a strategic assessment. The first one goes through governance. And you work through this with others in your association. And there's a, yes, we do this. There's a, we're starting to, it's in progress. And then there's a, no, we don't do this at all. And it isn't like a survey where at the end you find out which Muppet you are, or which Star Wars villain or whatever it happens to be. It's just a question of, did you answer mostly yes? Did you answer mostly no? What areas did you have where you could improve upon? So the first one is around governance, kind of why are we here? What do we do as an association? How do we get the nice things? The next one is a fiscal assessment. So what are your dues and fees? How are you filing taxes and financial reporting? And again, how do we get the nice things? And then there's an operational assessment that kind of looks at the structure of your association, boards and committees, meetings and trainings, advocacy and legislation. And can we all say it together? How do we get the nice things? Because ultimately the association can be everything from a social gathering where you get together and commiserate with one another, talk about, some of the things that are happening, to a much more formal, concrete organization that offers certifications, trainings, and other things. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what the guidebook does. This is all living on our website, which is electioncenter.org/CEAL or CEAL, CEAL. And we'll have more information and content available there as time progresses. So thanks again for letting me chime in with this most recent project. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, TJ.
Perfect, and I'm gonna pitch it right away to Grace and Noah to describe their resource. So Grace or Noah, take it away.
All right, I think we should be good. Thanks, TJ. Thanks, Tammy. Tammy really teed this up perfectly. So we're going to present about a similar resource, sort of a model, a checklist situation that BPC and the elections group have been developing for about 6 months now, but specifically focused on that training element that Tammy talked a little bit about. So a little bit of background, BPC and the elections group have been working on a joint effort since October of 2023 to bolster the election workforce, to bolster professionalization of the field. We've done this with an interdisciplinary group called the Election Workforce Advisory Council, which Tammy is a delightful member of. It's a group of election officials, academics, and other partners working on this workforce and professionalization question. And we built the whole project around 3 pillars: recruitment, retention, and training. And we're focusing today on that last one, training. This is a new resource that we've put out, I think, a month or 2 ago now, to help election officials think through what does their training program look like and how can you improve it? What are those next steps? This is built based on some previous research that we did over at BPC and the elections group, just assessing the state of training in the elections field. So how does every state train their election officials? And what we found was that a lot of states have really good best practices. A lot of states are doing components of this training really well, but some states also have room for improvement. And so the thought was to bring all of those best practices together, decide what is really central to the experience of a training program for election officials, and then build a model that election officials all around the country can follow and adapt to their needs. So the goal of the document is really to be that support for election officials and training providers who are building training programs or trying to improve them. We're especially thinking about those associations who are building or improving and maturing their own training programs. And like the CEAL document that Tammy described, it's can be used as a self-assessment tool, right? To see where you're at and where you can go next. You can also use it to help design a new program from scratch. So I'm going to have Noah walk us through some of the particulars of the document. There's a lot going on, so we're only going to skim the surface, but the link will be in the chat if you want to see the whole thing.
That's great. And thanks, Grace and Tammy. I think about Tammy and the Election Center, it's 2,000 members, right? Even when CISA was super involved and CIS and the ISEC, they got to maybe 3,000 members of the election community. The EAC, they probably got a reach of a little bit bigger than that. you recognize there's probably 11,000 election officials around the country. And so all this thinking and work at the national level only goes so far. All of the great work and information sharing happens down in the sort of associations, and the burdens on election officials are really, really high right now. So I really appreciate Tammy, especially bringing together the associations and see how you can support them to support their members better. And so Grace and I and our teams worked a lot on thinking about the narrow aspect of training and certification programs, studied a bunch of them around the country to pull out, a similar guidebook that would let you look at your program and, determine whether or not you're picking up on all the best opportunities or the best practices that are helping other associations succeed. And so for each of these little things you see around the circle of program design and governance, you'll see on the following pages that we really outlined a few of the activities or components that might demonstrate that, for example, you've got a clear purpose, that you're getting participation from the right audience that you want, whether it's new election officials solely focused on running their first election, or keeping your veteran election officials engaged, whether you're tailoring training in a particular way to new and emerging issues, whether you're actively seeking feedback and adjusting and improving your program to help meet the needs, whether you're delivering it in a format that matters. Like online is great. It's accessible to everybody and their staffs, and you can get to everybody, but you can't build relationships in the same way that you do in person. Well, how do you balance those things? And then how do you manage it? How do you build the appropriate partnerships with organizations that are willing to help support it? How do you budget it? And so go to the next slide, please. And we'll just quick highlight. We can't walk through it, but for each of those big sections, we've got a little decision matrix that would help you if you were evaluating your own program or if you were starting up a new one and you wanted to think about things like you write your initial charter of the program and you wonder, like, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? Well, based on the analysis of the committee and others, going through this questionnaire, it's pretty core to people to think about, like, why we're doing this, what's its scope, and then we dig a little deeper. So like if you, section 1.2 is this program reinforces kind of shared values that we have in a community. So Tammy, earlier in the year, and her team, along with the American Law Institute, I think, and a few others, published a document, a new set of sort of standards. The Center for Tech and Civic Life and the U.S. Alliance for Election Administration published a set of values. They go. So we think about, like, when we build a course, it's going to be different for each state, right? Our programs are different, our equipment's different, our culture's different, our practice is different. We could just do all mail and be focusing on running a great mail room, or you could be running mail and early voting and in person, and we've got to focus a lot on logistics. So it's very different. But what binds us are these values, right? And so if we ground what we do in values, we're creating norms that permeate across the country. So you can go to the next slide, but the format of the report lays out in this way. So if there's a component that we called core or exemplary, for example, you can dig in and read a little bit more about the component and how it might manifest. Next slide, please. So that's like programmatic. We did a similar construction for course content. All right. So as we construct any course, are you digging in? Back one, if you would, please. Sorry. Just want to quickly highlight across the top, like, is this grounded in laws? Okay, great. You told them about the laws, but how does that apply in a particular jurisdiction? Can you tease out best practices so you start to get a shared norm of practice across the state? Have you designed it in a way that is engaging so people aren't just dying by PowerPoint like y'all are right now from me? Are you elevating the great work that other organizations or states are doing? How are you testing? Is it rigorous enough? How's the design? And again, continuous improvement? Are you coming back to it every time to make sure you're meeting the needs? So you can see it follows the same framework of whether certain things are kind of core to a great course or whether it's real exemplary, something you might want to be able to consider. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Yay! Done. With that, I would invite you to check it out, especially for those of you, that are participating as part of your working group that build your, even if they're not formal training programs, right? You just get to put a couple trainings together at every state conference. It's still a valuable document. I'd also push you to our website at the elections group, where in our learning management system, we've got some courses, but you can download the materials, take them, republish them. They're white labeled. They can help drive any content that you want to give as part of your program. All right, TJ, thanks.
That's excellent. Well, I think we'll just jump right into some questions. I think my first one is, these are obviously excellent resources. A ton of time went into creating these. But if I'm an election official, a local election official in a state that doesn't have perhaps a mature association or certification and training program at all, like asking each of you, what's my first step? How can I get started? How can I get the ball rolling? What can I do?
I'll jump in on that one first. I think that one of the things we tried to be really intentional about as we put this together, as far as the checklist can also be aspirational. It can be revelatory. It can maybe explain or list a topic or a manifestation of your association you've never thought about. And that might be something really foundational to running a nonprofit, because in many cases, the associations are in fact a nonprofit organization. But have you filed all your proper paperwork? Is it being kept up to date? There are things like that in it that might be revelatory to someone who maybe just got the box, right? So we know that in many cases, you made eye contact. You're now the president of your state association, and I've gotten these calls over the years to say, "Oh my God, what do I do? I'm the association president. I have to put on a statewide conference this year. Where do I even begin?" And so the checklist is really meant not only as a self-assessment, but also as a little bit of a guide to get the conversation started and going, because you know what you know. And in the same way that local election officials rarely get to go see other election offices, which is something we've tried to incorporate into every convening now of at the election center. Because it's the similar thing with associations. You don't realize what other things other associations are doing and the services that they're providing. And it can be a bit of a lift at the beginning. But in order to get those nice things, sometimes you do have to put in the work. And let's be clear, you're going to be putting in the work one way or the other. It's just a question of, is it being done intentionally with the outcome that you ultimately want?
I mean, I've got a couple thoughts, Grace. If you don't mind, I'll pop in. When it comes to a training and certification program, I mean, I'll highlight that on our website, we've got a DIY guide of how to start this thing up, all from creating a community of interest, a committee, what a model charter might look like. I would say, nobody's coming to save you. I mean, you can call us, we can help, Tammy will help, Grace will help. But the feds aren't going to save you. There's just nobody but you to take the ball and run with it. So I would say, don't be scared of it. Lean in. When it comes to the organizational stuff, the guide that Tammy can help set the path for maturity. Our couple resources can help make the job a little bit easier as you step it up. I'd really lean into the idea that as important as the information you're sharing is, more important is creating a community with your colleagues around the country, well, particularly your state, creating a shared language, some fellowship at the table during these trainings. And that if you wait to do it perfect, you're going to lose years. Like, do it now. You're going to get 80% of a benefit by just being intentional about your program now. And there's plenty of time to perfect it as the years go by.
Yeah, I think Noah is exactly right. That those relationships are really key, right? And Tammy too, like the relationships you build around the country with election officials are how you get those best practices, right? You're not reinventing the wheel. There are other folks in other states who might have ideas that are going to be valuable, but also really starting with those relationships in your own state is the key because like Noah said, right? If you have a conference already, an annual conference that your association hosts or biannual conference, you can already incorporate training into that. You probably already are. And it really is just about being intentional and being thoughtful about how you design that. And you're not starting from scratch on that front either, right? There's a lot of good resources out there and a lot of good best practices that you can take from folks in different states, maybe even folks in your own states who have trained their offices, trained their poll workers. But really, yeah, building those relationships within your own association, within your own state, will give you a community of people who can make sure that the ball keeps rolling. That's the other thing, is it can't just all be on one person, right? Building that community really means that the project will live on.
Can I jump in real quick, TJ, beforehand? So I 100% agree. No, Noah says no, I can't jump in. Ooh, Noah. I will say I took a screenshot and Noah's going like this, so I can leverage that. I can use that against you. No, I would just say that it is important as to know that there are not only these resources, but you have here on the screen 3 organizations that are willing to come out and help with all of this. So Election Center, the Elections Group, Bipartisan Policy Center. We have a whole list in the back of the guidebook of the partners in CEAL who are dedicated to helping to support associations and who can help you with some of the burden that you have in putting on conferences and finding content. And that's where we really wanted to make sure that you know about these resources and understand that they're available to anyone in any state or commonwealth. And it's just important to know that we're out there and we're available. And the vast majority of the resources are being put together by current and former election officials, so they are relevant, and we want you to be involved as well. So if this is something of that interests you, make sure that you get a hold of Grace and become part of the working group, or reach out to us at Election Center and leverage all the resources and the great things that the elections group are putting together.
That's excellent. Thank you, Tammy. And I will call out the Q&A function. I see we have a few questions in there that we'll get to toward the end. I'll jump ahead on one. Tammy will appreciate this one. The question is electionline.org the best thing since sliced bread or the best thing since pockets? So there you go, Tammy.
It says anonymous attendee, but I'm going to guess that 2 of the questions are from the same person. Looking at you, Doug Chapin.
Excellent.
And the answer is yes, it is.
I love it. I'm going to touch on a point that Tammy made about the fact that, both current and former election officials contributed greatly to the creation of these resources. Can either anybody, really, doesn't have to be Tammy, doesn't have to be Noah, doesn't have to be Grace, anybody jump in about some of that practitioner input and maybe some of the things that, as you went through the process of creating these resources, some of the things that surprised you.
Yeah, I can start on that. So we had the whole report informed by the Election Workforce Advisory Council, of course, which is election officials and researchers and some not even election related workforce experts, just to get that outside perspective. But we convened a subcommittee of EWOC, as we affectionately call it, to focus on this particular report. So we did a couple of sessions, and they helped to design it, they helped read it. There was a lot of back and forth to achieve a consensus around, first of all, what are those components and subcomponents of a quality training program? And then what's core and what's exemplary. That was the thing I found surprising, TJ, was my sense of what was a core component versus an exemplary component was not the same as everybody else's. Folks had really different experiences with that. And those conversations I found really enlightening, because different folks in different states who have either designed or gone through different training programs had different sets of priorities.
Noah, you got anything? I think, Noah, you make an excellent point about, sometimes it's not about the things that you learn, but the relationships that you make, the friends that you make.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. That's what I remember most from my CEAL training, now probably 10 years old. But so many of my contacts are people that I met in Sanibel or somewhere else during some afternoon storm, right, Tammy? So, but they were people that I've come to rely on and lean on in my hard times during elections, and learn a lot from. I think one differentiator for state associations from some of the national efforts is that there's an opportunity to really do some like nuts and bolts. So if you I think of CEAL as like this amazing liberal arts education. We all come away with a shared sense of language, some amazing like colleagues, like this undergraduate college experience. And then you go into an election office and it's all technical skills. It's DeVry, you need the IIT kind of learning. And the state association programs, depending on how they're crafted, can really sort of dig down into the specific paperwork you want to use in our state to comply with the laws, to make sure your chain of custody documentation is perfect. Like they're an extension of each other. These two things can layer really, really well together. But state association trainings are going to be the place where you can move the ball on best practice, way more so than sort of some of the national stuff.
Add to that real quickly. Also, I think back when I first started in this space in 2003, after having been a temp in 1998, which somebody recently said, "Oh, I bought a house that was built in the 1900s." And I was like, don't talk like that. That sounds way too old. Anyway, so I think when we think back the last 10, 20 years of our profession, there has been this evolution, right? We talk about, after HAVA, people need to be IT managers. And then we had, COVID hit and we need to be cybersecurity and you need to be health expert. Now you need to be a communications expert. And also we have to address that the way we talk about our work and the way that we interact with our communities and stakeholders, we need more people in the room who are experts in other fields to help us inform how we talk about what we do and where we talk about what we do and when we talk about what we do. And so I think that kind of ties into this notion that we have all these organizations are relying on election administrators, but we have to be cognizant that we don't know what that next field is going to be that we're expected to be experts in, because it's coming. We don't know exactly what it might be yet, although there's, it might be AI, who knows for sure. But I think that we have to just continue to make sure that the field has conduits to make sure that we are able to distribute whatever the content is that needs to get out to the professionals who conduct our elections that are the bedrock of our society. And I would like to think that are still the aspirations for many countries around the globe.
I think that you make a great point on sort of the infrastructure, right? Strong associations as a vehicle to adopt and distribute like the information in this dynamic environment. That's hugely important. I remember one of my biggest challenges was when something happened to a neighbor, I would get asked, and it would like reflect on our profession. And I've never had a great answer because, we've all got only so much political capital. And you're not necessarily going to spend it on your neighbor, even though they're a colleague. And so one of the challenges was like, how do you craft language around them? And one of the best was, I don't know how they do it there. But we're all trained to a fairly rigorous program. You know, colleague X was there every time, paying attention, passed the courses. You know, I trust that it's complying with the law, or he or she. And like, to the extent that there's a benefit beyond community and knowledge transfer of these programs, there's a political benefit, a way to use a training and certification program to create like a superstructure around each of us as individuals running elections.
Yeah, I think you're touching on like a broader sense of resilience, right? That comes from these types of things. Are there, thinking more broadly about that resilience piece, are there other things that folks can get out of, you know, using the resource or making their association stronger, standing up a certification and training program? What's that list beyond what we've talked about? Are there additional things?
I mean, I would just, on the individual's career path, like deciding that you're king of your own castle, you're going to stand something up for your community. I'm going to be king of my castle for a minute. I'm an election official. I want this to happen in Illinois. I'm going to do it, right? I'm going to create the working group. I started, you know, that's a big feather in the cap in somebody's career. And, you know, put you on a place where you can go lead in a variety of different places. Tammy, I hope you got a picture of that.
Wish I had as well, but you caught me off guard. I was a little dumbfounded. We can pose it later. One thing to add to that real quickly, though, in all seriousness, is that I think that part of the other things we want to make sure that, or one of the other relationships we want to make sure we're leveraging, there's two actually. The first is, I think that associations can help to inform a greater environment around academia, around election administration. So, you know, 20 years ago, there wasn't a lot of collaboration between practitioners and academics. And we've come a long way. Everything from the Institute of Election Administration Research and Practice at Auburn with Election Center to MedSol to URI, University of Rhode Island, and their engineering school. There's all sorts of examples now where we have been able to leverage all of those academics that are out there who are interested in this topic, and it helped to inform their study and their scholarship in a way that actually helps administrators in administering the elections. And so that is not to say that there might not still be some academics that just want to get you. Just want to, you know, have a gotcha moment. The same with the media, which is my other piece, is that we need to continue to foster relationships so that we can help inform the stories that are out there being told about the administration of elections and the things that we all hold together and hold dear. I try never to say one size doesn't fit all. I've said it in the past, but I try not to say that anymore because we really do have far more that bind us together as shared values, shared principles. Some of the practices might vary somewhat, but at the end of the day, we're all here to ensure that eligible citizens have unimpeded access to exercising their right to vote and that those votes are counted accurately and reported appropriately. And so we have a lot more in common than I think sometimes as a field we like to pretend that we're all special snowflakes, and we are to some degree, but at the end of the day, you know, it's all in the same sort of blizzard. Carry that horrible metaphor.
Well, think about in the policy environment, and you've got institutions like NAS, who in some ways, just given the nature of who they are statewide, like partisan elected, have a hard time leaning in on some certain policies. NAS said, great, but generally like beholden to NAS leadership, so not, you know, their policy lean in is a little different. The idea that the effective state associations, some of which you put in your case studies, can really drive policy and anchor policy changes or reform within their own state. way more effectively than any one county official could on their own. And so, to the extent there is system-wide benefit to mature associations in state, like, goes without question. But the idea that your CEAL program can bring together leaders of these associations, create a forum, there could be a future state where, they're able to speak with more collective voice that can impact national policy in ways that other associations are probably limited in their capacity.
Yeah, I'll just double down on that policymaking piece is that one of the things state associations can be really good at is being that expert voice at the table in their state policymaking environment, right? To their state legislators, to their governors. And it's helpful because you have all of the combined expertise of everybody in the state working together. I think Tammy and Pam like to call it speaking with one voice. And that's really just critical to ensuring that that election officials have a seat at the table, right? It's a lot easier for that to be the association's seat at the table than it is to be one particular election official's seat at the table, because then you're not dependent on that election official sticking around and never retiring. But it also means that the voice of many is a lot stronger and a lot more persuasive than the voice of one might be. So I think definitely this is part of the CEAL maturation framework, right, is being able to speak to legislators, to maybe even hire a lobbyist in some states, to have your executive director have the capacity to speak before policymakers. So I would say that's like one of the other really important relationship components that state associations are uniquely positioned to be able to do.
And it can be difficult. Let's be really clear. If you have a less than we'll just say less than good relationship with your chief election official, whether it's the state board, secretary of state, or you have very adversarial chairs of the election subcommittee and the legislature, whatever it happens to be, there can be some real tensions there. And even within an association, there can be fractions and factions. And so it's not an easy fix at all. But the one thing that I will say has been a pitfall historically is to be the association of no, we don't want that. We never want to change. We never, that is not going to engender anyone's solicitation of your advice if you always say no. And so I think that it's important to figure out, what are the priorities of the association, and maybe that's part of that mission statement and your guidelines. There's the kind of ethos of, we just conduct it by the rules that we're given. We don't want to be seen as having our finger on the scale. Well, then you might have to deal with some really bad legislation that you weren't able to inform what the unintended consequences of that legislation might be. So there are places where state associations have been on the forefront, sometimes the cutting, sometimes the bleeding edge of legislation, and have been in conflict with their Secretary of State. So the whole Colorado model was not something that secretary wanted to have passed. And so I think that there are some real challenges there, and there's no easy answer, unfortunately. I wish if we did, we could sell that pill and we'd all retire to that great job administering elections in Hawaii. Put Neil out of a job.
No, anything else, or we can jump to the Q&A if you want.
Well, I do think it's important. I'm going to hold it and come back to it because it's more of a wrap.
Got it. All right. You can, I expect to see the court jester, I mean the king hat again at some point. All right. I'm gonna jump to the Q&A. I do encourage folks, if you're listening, please use the Q&A function. We'll get to as many of these as we can over the next few minutes. First question, to what extent, if at all, are state associations looking to band together to advocate for LEOs at the federal level? Feels like a Tammy question, but feel free to jump in, anybody.
So I think that there are, even within a state association, there can be challenges coming up with a unified voice that all members feel represent them. And it's the same with national associations. So I think that there are associations like Election Center where we have a legislative committee. And although we don't lobby, we do have do educational information, page and line edits of drafts of legislation. We testify when requested, all of those types of things. And into that, and NACO, of course, has a very strong advocacy arm of their association from the counties. Absent of that, there have been a couple of amazing efforts by Issue One with the Faces of Democracy and others that have leveraged sort of pulling together these bipartisan messages. I think that there's still a lot that can be done, but ultimately for associations, it has to come from the membership. The membership need to inform committee work. The members need to lead on what they want their committees to do and to be. So at this point in time, and Noah had a great summation of some of the other national national organizations at the state level, there has been an absence. And so I think that, it's one of the things that at Election Center, since I've been there for the last 2 years, we have been really receptive to what role can we play that our members are comfortable with in this moment, because we do need to make sure that members are comfortable with what an organization is ultimately saying and advocating for or against, if they're advocating. And as a nonprofit, in most cases, without some very specific caveats, you cannot advocate for or against anything specifically on a proposed bill, or unless you want to file as a different type of nonprofit.
We'll jump to the next question. Do any of the existing trainings address skills needed to navigate the politics of the election officials community, whether the politics of the elected governing board members of their jurisdiction or of the political parties in their community?
That's
No?
a good idea.
That's one of Tammy's magic pills. If anyone had
We
that.
want you to teach it. So no, I mean, in all seriousness, it is what everyone is grappling with. And the challenge in this moment, from what I've been speaking to election officials, is that all too often the facts and truth don't matter anymore. So, you talk to a particular voter or stakeholder, whomever it happens to be. And I had one person say, I talked to them for like an hour, and at the end they said, well, let's just set the facts aside for a minute and I'll tell you how I feel. Okay, that's a whole different environment. So I do think that it's really difficult when, as election officials, you want to be transparent, but transparency can come at a cost if things are taken out of context. You want to answer people's questions with facts and truth and information, but if that doesn't land, and if the person only wants to hear what they want to hear, where does that leave you? And I think at the end of the day, we just have to continue to bang the drum of the truth and be transparent and try and explain things as best as we can. But beyond that, yeah, I'm looking for that magic pill, that elixir.
I can't promise a magic pill, but I do think you already see some of this happening in training and in association contexts, right? You see someone who finds a successful strategy to convince their county commissioners that they need more money. And then that's often a replicable strategy, right? They say, I think there's a case in South Carolina where somebody actually took their county commissioners to their office. And that was the thing where the county commissioners were then convinced, oh, you actually do need a new building. This isn't sustainable. And that's a transferable model. It's not going to work everywhere, but it might work somewhere else. And so I think formalizing that into a training class might just look like sharing some of those best practices, pulling out successful examples, and then trying things, right? I'm not saying just throw things at the wall and see what sticks, but, maybe throw some things at the wall and see what sticks, knowing that different folks are going to have different relationships with their commissioners, with their county bodies. But I think we're not starting from scratch, right? Folks do make those cases successfully, and they do leverage resources and academic partnerships like Tammy was talking about to, give people the data. And I think that is a thing that can be, institutionalized a little bit into something like a training program, because it does already happen.
Well,
Yeah, and just to the,
go ahead.
it may be impossible to convince some people, but like there is a lot of room to just execute better, right? I mean, I made an entire career of screwing up and somehow surviving it and like getting a little bit better. And I mean, if we can shore up our ranks, both within our own offices, but within our states, it makes it a lot harder. Both over time, people's experience just become, I had a great election. I didn't read anything in the newspaper. I didn't hear something about another county. Like, we're going to play the long game here. And what we do control is our ability to execute. And if we focus in there to make sure that like we're meeting the service level expectations of our voters, we are following best practices. Our numbers do match every single time, right? That's a place where the return on investment is really high. And a lot of other stuff has to change in society to like get believed or the truth, but we can't, I mean, that's not our place. We can spend 20 years executing well and getting a lot better, and it will be time well spent.
That's excellent. For what it's worth, I think all of you could co-teach how to make friends and influence people together. So I think you're all fabulous. Tammy, the next question I think touches a little bit on something that you've talked about, but the question is, any advice on how to handle your state's chief election official if they're not friendly or adversarial toward your association?
I think that is, unfortunately, it's not uncommon because of the nature of the turnover sometimes of that chief election office, where potentially that person wants to be governor and that's their main vision. So I think part of it is just getting to know them, invite them to your offices, invite them to your conferences, try and find common ground as much as possible. But also knowing that you need to stand your ground when you need to stand your ground. And I used the Colorado example because I think it's a really good one around when in fact it's important to do what is right as opposed to what might be politically astute in any given moment. And I am the last person to be talking about political astutement. I don't know, skills, astuteness, whatever it is, for navigation of some types of relationships. But that's where I've seen it can play out. Also, sometimes it's just a waiting game until the next election, and maybe they will become governor and you'll have a secretary or someone, a state board that is more amenable. And other times it just doesn't play out that way.
Well, Tammy, what do you think about compartmentalizing the sort of policy side of things versus execution? Because we've got shared liabilities between locals and states, either side failing to execute burns the other, and focusing on the sort of execution side and the shared liabilities, like, it is a place where I think common ground is easy to establish. And if you can compartmentalize the sort of policy disagreements and agree to put them in a little box over there, you can get a lot of common ground on just executing well.
Grace, anything there?
No, I think it's a balancing act, right? Because I think the most important thing is lean into the fact that the local election officials are the experts on how elections are run in their state, right? And that may only get you so far with your Secretary of State or your Board of Elections or whoever it is that you may be in tension with, but that's also not the only player in the game, right? Your state legislature is a player in the game. If it's a Board of Elections, there's more than one person involved there. So I think like understanding all of the players, all of the factors involved in what might be a contentious relationship matters. And I also think Noah's right that even the most contentious relationships, you're still doing the same, you're still in the same, camp at the end of the day, right? An attack on one is an attack on all may not be totally true, but it's at least a little bit true. And everyone's going to have a better time if, at least on the actual execution, technical aspects of running an election, there are going to be places where you can agree. And starting there, building the relationship over time, it honestly can be the same approach that you take to legislators, right? If you can find that one little place where you have common ground and can talk to each other, that can help build out a larger relationship over time.
Amazing. I think we've got time for one more question answered quickly, and then we'll wrap it up. The question I see here is, what do you see as the major challenges facing the training of election officials in the foreseeable future? We left a very easy one that can be answered very quickly for the last one that I need answered fast. Tammy, I saw your finger.
I have a quick one. Yep, I have a quick one. And that is, we can't, throwing money at something doesn't always solve everything, but I do feel like the prohibitions on private funding is hurting state associations and local election officials from being able to receive scholarships in some places, or to be able to leverage some of the free training, free tools, free information that's available out there. And so I'm hopeful that there'll be some better interpretations around that piece of it, so that the various associations and organizations can start to leverage some of those offerings.
Yeah, plus 100%. It's all time and attention. So not on the funding bands, but on my specific answer is that to do this really well, you need to spend some time on it and make it a priority. And we tried through all these guides to make that path a little easier to follow, but you still got to do it. And that's going to be the biggest hurdle. So creating a financially self-sustaining association and a program that can be monetized is probably the best path forward, because then it's self-sustaining. But in the meantime, reach out to any of us to workshop these guides. I sat with a state association last week and spent an hour on Tammy's guide and walked through the association, and they circled 12 things that they decided to focus on, then walked through Grace and our guide, and they found 15 things they were going to go through and would walk away forever. But we spent a few hours together breaking bread, and they have a clear path forward. I think we can offer that in a variety of formats to all y'all. And if it's a priority issue for you, bring it up to your leadership and say, hey, call Grace, call TJ, call Tammy.
Excellent.
Yeah. I think Noah's right on the sustainability thing, right? I think that is the thing that is going to make or break a lot of training programs is, will it happen in the same way next year? Will it improve next year? I also think that there's a balancing act between making sure everybody learns the material they actually absolutely have to learn to run an election, and preparing for the next thing. We don't know what it's going to be. We never do. But I think building that sustainable model, both within the training program, but also within the association, is the best way to be able to be both responsive to new issues as they arise, and Lord knows they always arise, but also not forgetting those fundamentals, right? And just having a sustainable funding model, having a bench of election officials who have the knowledge and the expertise and the experience to teach your peers to share those best practices, and doing your best to make sure that the association and the training, all of it wrapped up together, continues for years to come.
Amazing. Well, I, for one, am very sad that we are at the end of our time together today. I want to thank all of the panelists for joining us for an excellent discussion. Thank you to everybody who came on to listen. The resources that we mentioned have been put in the chat. We'll also include them in a follow-up note. As always, our inbox is always open at the Elections Group, support@electionsgroup.com. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And we look forward to seeing you for another conversation soon. Thank you, everybody. Have a great one.